Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Strickland. Welcome to the ATM aviation session. Very pleased to be back here in Dubai to chair the session today. Our guest joining me on the stage today, I would say needs no introduction. He has a career spanning more than 50 years in the airline industry. And when he has something to say, it's always worth listening to. The words are both informative and wise, I would say, and I think that's a genuine statement that I'm making there, having known Tim a number of years. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the President of Emirates, Sir Tim Clark. So, Tim, welcome to WTM. I was thinking the other day, we haven't sat down to do this in 4 years, so 4 years has flown by. 2019 was the last time in person. We did a couple of virtual ones in the intervening years. A lot has happened and a lot for us to talk about today. The theme of ATM this year is very much around sustainability. So I wanted to start with some very focused questions to you about that, because there are other sessions addressing the issue for the entire duration. You know, the industry's in the dock. You know, we know there are targets to be met in terms of reaching net zero by 2050, but there are many challenges. We see governments in different parts of the world taking very different views. We know that technology can't permit engine change, for example, on long-haul aircraft for maybe 40, 50 years. What's your perspective on where we are right now and where we can realistically go to deliver what we need to do in terms of sustainability?
Well, I guess if you ignore the elephant in the room, which in our business is the fuel that we fly our aeroplanes on, representing, jury's out, well, it's 2.5% of global emissions. Put that to one side and look what corporations like the Emirates Group does to mitigate its carbon footprint. And that, taken together, is a good story. And it covers, obviously, our interest in any furtherance of scaling sustainable aviation fuel. We flew the first aeroplane, first engine on 100% fuel. We were flying it SAF in 2017. And there's a whole string of initiatives, whether it be 150 million bits of plastic that we used on the aeroplanes, and now we're recycling all those, repurposing them. So whether it be service delivery on the ground, whether Donata is doing electrification of its ramp, the way we tick the boxes with regard to green financing and the supply chain, making sure that as far as we can, we pass muster in the areas that we can actually do something. It's very difficult to assume that a 380 will fly from Dubai to Los Angeles on sustainable aviation fuel in the short term. That's not likely to happen simply because we can't scale at that pace. And the cost of doing it, and the people have got to invest, or the entities have got to invest in scaling sustainable aviation fuel on the basis of biomass or whatever else it may be. The real trick is to create power other than sustainable wind and solar, etc., probably through nuclear. And nuclear power will give the ability to create the synthetic fuels that take you away from fossil and whatever else. But when's that going to happen? Sometime out in the future. So we're doing the best we can. It's a good story. We've certainly got to grips with it over the last 5-7 years, trying to sort the way we go about our processes and our practices, making sure that it tick box as far as the environmental footprint is concerned.
And are you optimistic, Tim, that we can deliver the volume of fuel that's going to be needed, SAF fuel, however that is defined, to supply, particularly long-haul fleets in the years ahead? Because we're at tiny levels currently, and we seem to have an approach where the US seems to be actively incentivizing production and looking at the price as well. In Europe, there's more stick than carrot in terms of you must deliver this by X time, but we're not going to help you particularly to do it.
Well, it's a very good question. The whole business about scaling, as I keep going on about sustainable fuel, aviation fuel, or other sources of fuel, is incredibly vexing, simply because we can do it. We have the technology to do it. We don't have the money at the moment. I say that globally, the funding is not there to industrialize and operationalize the production of sustainable aviation fuel, not just for our sector. Remember, aviation prior to the pandemic burned 550 million tons of aviation fuel a year. If you extrapolate that on a linear basis until 2030, 2032, given what we have seen post-pandemic, you're talking about 700 million tons. If you can get 10% of that, it's 70 million tons. Well, here, that's really not going anywhere. But to get the 70 million tons, you need an awful lot of money and an awful lot of repurposing refineries, old and new, to produce this. But then don't forget, in the part of the crack spread that the JP1 fuel comes from, it's the bottom end of the crack. So you've got high octane petrol for cars at one end and all the rubbish at the bottom, paraffin, diesel oil, oil for central heating. And of course in that is aviation fuel. So there's an opportunity cost element here, because there are going to be some suppliers who say, well, we want that SAF fuel for central heating for those that remain and are not on electric or whatever. So it's not going to be an easy, I can't actually get there in terms of the calculus in all of this without seeing probably $50 trillion going into the global economy to set out a meaningful target to decarbonize. So we've just got to work at it, try and carbon capture, try and work on the technology, and I know many entities are doing it, to find a way to introduce synthetic fuels into the likes of us. But don't forget, at 2%, when you think automotive was 18%, utilities and power, 45, 50%, the real problem children are in those areas, and yet they've gone after those, whether it be nuclear, whether it be wind, whether it be solar, whether it be hydro, etc., in the power and utilities. And the automotive industry has embraced battery power in an enormous way, but that's not without its difficulties. You've got to get the minerals for the batteries, and they're in short supply. So, but we are really making inroads into what I call the major culprits in the carbon footprint side of things. We're doing our best, but we still are only 2%. And some people say we're going to go to 3%. Well, really, compared to 18% of automotive as it was, and the others, is it such a big problem at the moment? That's all I'm saying. We've got to deal with it. We will deal with it, but give us a bit more time.
And also in terms of, as you say, at the moment, the dynamics are small, relatively speaking, in terms of aviation's contribution. Yet we seem to be seeing more and more claims of greenwashing. We've seen a number of airlines recently in different territories in the dock accused of greenwashing and spinning a yarn about what's being done. What's your take on that?
Well, we won't do that. My team know that, certainly from my point of view, I want the truth. I don't want fibs and half-truths and greenwashing. We must say it as it is. We must show what we are doing. And that is not, we must walk the talk, not just talk the talk. And if we can't do that, then don't do it and don't hold out that you can, because in the end, the high level of global interest in the international media and for the citizens of the planet will call you out, and you'll be chastened by the vitriol that could come your way. Your brand won't stand for that. So the Emirates brand is essentially one of good practice, high quality products, delivery to the aspirations, creation of the expectations, and never letting yourself down. And greenwashing could let yourself down if you're not careful.
Turning now, Tim, to Emirates itself and the last year, I think, if I'm not mistaken, your year-end results will be out in a matter of days. Your half-year results already showed a substantial improvement after the challenging couple of years of COVID. Give us a flavour of how the last year has been. I mean, every airline I've seen reporting has been producing stunning figures, many back to profitability, yields higher than probably you and I have ever seen in the last 40 years, and the performance going forward looks strong.
Yeah, I think the industry has benefited from, surprisingly, the change in the trading conditions internationally and domestically since the pandemic was ended. I like to think that, and I've said that many times in the last few years, that we didn't build Emirates over 35, 36 years to have it stopped by an influenza bug. So there was no mention, there was no notion that we would stop or slow, etc. We just prepared ourselves to get ourselves into good shape and organise the resources of the business to kickstart as soon as we could. And as you know, we started in earnest in early 21. Dubai, of course, was moving at pace anyway. So the notion that the return to demand for air travel would be the same as it was prior to the pandemic, we didn't subscribe to. The notion that people said there was going to be no corporate business, the business markets were going to fail. Mr. Bill Gates was talking about Teams being the only way to do business, and we said, well, we've heard all that before, we'll just carry on. So we moved quickly and we moved first, and we have produced a set of results which are exceptionally good this year, and you'll hear about those next week. It's a credit to the team of people who took an airline that was essentially grounded in the early part of 2020. We had 265 aircraft sitting on the ground until we activated the freighters, which we did very quickly and converted those into the passenger aircraft into freighters. But we were able to move quickly, and despite all the problems of borders opening and closing almost on a twice daily basis, we managed to push the business out. So by the fall of 21, 22, we were already really up there. About 80% of our production was in place. So as a result of all of that, and because we were able to get the resources of the business back into place, get the production up to where it needed to be, notwithstanding, but at one point there was $250, $300 million of cash bleeding every month from the business with no income.
Absolutely amazing.
So, for people like me, I'd never seen that before, and there was no way I was going to sit there and say, well, that's going to be the norm from now on. We have to do something about this, and so we did. And we stabilized the cash position by the middle of 21, and it started to grow very rapidly after that. So actually, it's quite a good story. I think the airline industry were late to realize, but then moved quickly themselves, the rest of them, and have done better than they thought they would do. Some of the airports, of course, as we know, didn't and wouldn't accept that this was anything other than a paradigm change in demand for travel and their services that they offered. Well, but now they learn.
I remember talking with you before in your belief that premium traffic would come back, and whether it was corporate or not would be this strand of leisure travel which we're seeing. I admit myself to be more cautious, thinking, well, has Tim really called this one right this time? And lo and behold, you did. It's quite stunning, that recovery. Are all markets back now other than China? And do you feel China itself is going to come back this year, or is that still a bit more uncertain because of the whole political outlook there about lockdowns internally?
Yes, I think China was the last holdout. Mm-hmm. We're back in there very, very. We're not quite to where we used to be, which was 5 380s a day going into China, but we're getting there pretty rapidly. The network has 133 points in existence today. Montreal starts on the 1st of July. So we haven't got places like Santiago, Edinburgh, Adelaide, Porto in Portugal in place yet, but we've still got issues. We're trying to get the remains of the 380s, the remains of the fleet of the 380s back into the air, because they've been on the ground for so long. We've had to do a lot of engineering remediation to get them flying again.
How many are actually flying now, Tim? Is it over 100?
We had 86 flying last week. And we've got another, we probably need to get another 20 or 30 in the air as soon as we can. But you've heard about supply chain, you've heard about parts, you've heard about all the bits and pieces that goes in, but we'll get there.
And you've said recently, I think I saw you quoted talking about the fact that any aircraft, but certainly the 380, that massive tonnage is not designed to sit there for 2 years, weighing on all those axles and the strain that's caused, as you said, you've got to work.
So those are the kind of things that you've got to go after, because, as you say, an aircraft is meant to be flying for 2/3 of its life with no load on the axles. If you put them 24/7, then you've got a 250-ton, 260-ton aircraft without any fuel in it, sitting on there all the time. Eventually, the axle will say, "Oh, I've had enough."
Had enough. And Tim, as we seemingly are coming out positively from COVID, we've now got a increasingly complex geopolitical situation. Obviously, we have the war situation in Ukraine. Even in the last few days, we've seen what's happening internally in Sudan and there are many more. What is your reading of the sensitivities of geopolitics in the world right now? Do you have an optimism that we're going to get past these? Because we see some very intransigent positions that, on the face of it, don't seem to have any obvious solutions with the dug-in positions that we see.
It's always a difficult one. We've been running probably the largest international airline in the world, full stop. And we've had to deal with multiple crises, interdictions of whatever they may be over the life of Emirates. Unfortunately, Sudan, it's a disaster, but if you look at what's happened in the world over the last few years, last 3 decades, you'll find that it's not an anomaly. I mean, I'm not being flippant, I'm not being facetious about saying it, but in our business, if you want to continue your production, you've got to work round and deal with all of these. Whether it be the rise of new carriers that we're reading about, hearing about, whether it be geopolitical instability, whether it be direct economic instability, the banks are failing in the US or whatever. In the end, it's surprising how resilient demand for air travel is. If you provide a good product at an affordable price and you connect people to where they actually want to go, not where you think they should go or where you need to tell them, they will follow. And the resilience of demand, air demand, is one thing that I've always cherished and nurtured as best I could in terms of the segments that have grown and exploded on us. Leisure is one of those. Here we are, ATM. But in the last 30 years, the leisure segments, hospitality, has grown. And here we have whoever it is from Egypt. So it's a huge opportunity. So when I was concerned about, or people were concerned about corporate segments in the business class cabins, if that's a bit of a misnomer, I knew that leisure would take it, and leisure will take more and more and more going forward. Artificial intelligence will render the 5-day week a complete anachronism. We'll all be on 3-day weeks with a lot more leisure time on our hands, more time on our hands, hopefully a bit more money to fly on wonderful carriers like Emirates and come to great cities like Dubai.
Good message, Tim. I mean, we've seen this pent-up demand that's being talked about a lot, and as you said, that leisure travel. There is also the angle of the discussion that, well, people have had this money that they couldn't spend in the last 2 years. If they didn't spend it on doing up their houses, they had it sitting there ready to travel. It's going to run out at some point. We have challenging economic outlook. Airlines, certainly looking ahead at the rest of this year, still optimistic on the booking levels they see. And you're talking there about a long-term trend. So you believe this is sustainable. It's not a flash in the pan that may end abruptly this year when that...
No, I do believe that the reason we took the decisions we did in 2020 with regard to the influenza bug, the COVID bug, it was all about having looked at what we did in the 35 years prior to this, knew how the market segments within the various elements of demand had changed and grown. We could see that these were not going to be suppressed indefinitely. So if you keep the cork down in the water for long enough, it'll come back in a vengeance. And it was down for 2 or 3 years. Now then, what happens after that? Demand will continue to be as robust as it has been. Let's make no mistake about that. The global economy is not something that is going into a permanent recession or whatever. It will move. It'll be fits and starts. But demand will continue. One of the segments I mentioned just now, leisure will grow. Hospitality, the whole of the leisure side of things will take a big uptick in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's something great for everybody here to hear. I mean, look at what Saudi Arabia is doing. It reckons that it's going to have 100 million tourists in Saudi, into Saudi by 2030. Well, hey-ho, that's 6.5 years' time. I mean, that's an enormous number of people to go into one country. But they honestly believe they can do it. And if you look at the metrics on what's happened in Dubai in the last quarter, you're up to nearly 5 million people who came in. We're already exceeding the pre-pandemic numbers. So it looks as though demand will retain and be as strong. Biggest issue probably is environmental, the carbon footprint. We've got to do better than that because more and more people want to travel, more and more people will travel. There is, despite large orders going out with some of the airlines today, there still is insufficient capacity to meet the demand as it stands today, and I think will be still there in 5 years' time. So as supply is restricted and demand is restricted, and as demand increases, prices will stay firm.
Well, you touched there, Tim, on Saudi Arabia and some of these orders. We've seen a string of enormous orders. You described the ambition of Saudi Arabia to reinvent itself as a country, no longer relying on oil, tourism beyond religious tourism, the massive order of a new airline, Riyadh Air. And we see similar things with massive order from Air India. Turkish Airlines, I think, has said they want to double their activity. Etihad, somewhat taken by surprise, I'll be honest, I saw in the past few days, is now talking about growing again substantially long haul, having retrenched. Do you tremble in fear at these, I mean, I'm asking a bit facetiously, at these areas of growth as taking a piece out of the Emirates pie? Can they all actually sustain it? Can they become an Emirates in a few years that you nurtured over 30 plus years?
Well, I only time will tell, John. I mean, we're quite flattered that a lot of them have used the word Emirates as the model in which they aspire to build their carriers in the various hubs around. So all I would say is that that's absolutely great. But building Emirates was not a question of, it wasn't an accident. We had to build this with a laser focus on the construct of the major elements of the business, and having the right people in and retaining their focus and not getting offsided by anything other than getting the job done. The business model essentially is a good one. It works well. We didn't move away from it. If they are going to try and emulate that, that's good because we know it works. But the trick is you've got to make money at the same time. And many of these carriers that we're hearing about could face the wrath of fair competition rules. For instance, the European Union. The Europeans don't like large billions being thrown at carriers for them to compete in their markets. They will call that unfair. So they've got to be careful about how they go about it. The trick is to get a group of people who know what they're doing, will deliver the entity that you want, and they'll deliver it in a profitable manner with little or no state intervention at all. And I haven't seen too much of that in terms of clear profitability and transparency. But the pressure will be on. Whoever wants to get into this game, their transparency is going to have to be there. Otherwise, they might find more difficulty in accessing the markets that they want to do. Apart from that, good luck. I mean, we've seen, I think we saw Qatar form in the late 90s, Etihad in 2003, Oman Air started to activate, and they've all been performing and creating business and moving business over their hubs. We had this question many years ago, back in the 90s or the early part of 2000. People asked the same question. Well, they're all still here, and they're all doing fairly well. So I believe that in case of the Saudi airlines, of which there are now going to be three, Riyadh, Neom, and Saudi Air, this is going to be very interesting to watch how this goes on, because Riyadh has been this is the most recent part of the Saudi aviation policy, and Saudi Air is thinking, well, I need a piece of this as well. So game on between them, and up pops Neom on the western side of Saudi Arabia, which is cobbled together with a major development of Saudi. I mean, good luck to them. If they're going to spend trillions of dollars, it's great for the area. It's great for the aviation industry. And good luck to them as far as I'm concerned. Does that affect us? No, I don't believe so. I think if Emirates continues to do what it's always done well, not drop its standards, keep that laser focus on the model and the brand, continue to innovate, change out, then as long as it's good, people will use you. It's like a good restaurant. You'll go back there time and time again if the food is good, the service is good, the ambience is good, and it's good value for money. So, you know, as we grow our business, and we will grow our business over the next 5-7 years with 165 aircraft on order and probably more coming, that, you know, the spread coupled with Fly Dubai and the growth of Dubai as a sort of a huge city-state, ocean fronting with all the qualities that it's clearly good at doing and will continue to do. Taken together, we'll deal with anything.
I mean, I guess Saudi Arabia's got the innate population, which, you know, the UAE would lack, so that's going to help, and young people who want to travel. I'm interested in the fact they not only are they going to have 3 airlines, but we have large European-type low-cost carriers going in there now in a big way. Wizz Air now flying to, I think, about 20 European destinations with 321 LR-type equipment. So it's quite a varied mix.
I think you've got to accept that, you know, with the in global economics today, one of the most potent growth regions is the Middle East. With the amount of money that is being spent, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, in the UAE and other areas around us, whether it be Qatar or Kuwait or Bahrain, etc., in the GCC, there is an awful lot of money going into infrastructural development, into business, into investment, attracting both foreign and local investment in there. So you started to see an uptick, if I can call it, in the GCC GDP, which is going to get even stronger. So I could see the kind of GDP growth in these regions going into double figures in the next few years. I'm not saying we'll match the Chinese in the good old days, but certainly it's very, very robust here. So all segments of the economies of these countries, not just in hospitality and travel, etc., whether it be real estate, banking, maritime, you name it, whatever it is going to get better. And there's going to be more and more investment in there. And it's going to be, the whole place is going to be a better place to live for expatriates as well as the local citizens. So it's a good story. If they want to put more airlines in, good luck.
Another topic, Tim, which I'm really happy to talk about, we've discussed over the years areas of resistance to Emirates and indeed other Gulf carriers' development. And it's as if, to me, on the outside, that the tectonic plates seem to have finally shifted, and we hear the announcement of the code share between yourselves and United. United now flying directly into Dubai again, and Canada as well. Air Canada's about to launch the Vancouver Dubai. You have a code share with them. You're starting Montreal, as you mentioned. You know, that must be really satisfying if you could breathe a sigh of relief over the time it's taken to actually make these steps forward. Do you think they are tectonic plates, or is it still going to require some building of trust on the side of these countries? Are they really willing to do what they say they're going to do?
That era of dealing with the pushback from the American carriers was driven mainly by individuals. I'm not sure that the carriers themselves in the middle management really supported what was going on, even though it took a lot of my time over in the United States having to deal with this. The truth of the matter was that we were a very successful business without state subsidy, and were able to make and grow our business organically to the level that it was when this, if you like to call it, war started. And we held out our hands, even in the middle of this, you call it back chat or back channels, etc., saying, why are you doing this? Work with us. We will bring far more value to you. For instance, if you looked at the United network or the Air Canada network or the American network, in the Eastern Hemisphere, apart from the Transpac, they were nowhere. And yet the evidence was clear that the Americas continents were drawing vast amounts of business from the very areas that we flew, and we could feed their networks. But of course, they'd already gone past the point of no return with regard to how they'd got the White House involved, Congress, the Senate, etc. It took a change of personalities, a change of management to realize that perhaps what we had offered them all those years ago could now be delivered to them. So you see United changing its international policy with regard to international operations. You see Air Canada seeing United as a star player, dealing with us, and we're saying to Air Canada, work with us, not against us, and we will bring you great things, which is what we're doing. So the commercial groups of both all these carriers and Adnan Kazim and his commercial team in Emirates, we brought all these together, and it's just the beginning. Others have made approaches to us, and we're waiting to see whether they're serious or not. But I think Emirates has demonstrated that it fears nobody. It treats all its peer group with respect. And we always make sure, it's a very important thing that we do, is make sure that the calculus ensures that the value is not all one way, that we do ensure that our partners get the value that they want to achieve. And if there's a problem with that, we will rectify that. So we do it. So it's basically trying to keep a clear, focused, transparent way of working with them. I think they like that. What you see is what you get. That's what you do with Emirates.
And I guess in the case of Canada, as you said, you're starting in Montreal in a couple of months or so time. When I saw that Air Canada was coming on Vancouver, I thought to myself, I imagine that was going to be Emirates, as quick as a flash on Vancouver, because I think that's how Seattle was born, because you couldn't get across that side of the border. And is that double daily, I think, to Seattle?
Well, we're very pleased that Air Canada is going to Vancouver. Yes. We would have kept Seattle going had we got Vancouver as well. Yeah. So I'm not particularly worried about that. The Seattle-Portland region, given Microsoft, given Amazon, given just about everybody else, yes, Boeing up there, these big corporations, it was. And I think Qatar Airways is in there as well. I think they're doing reasonably well. So Seattle in its own right is fine. Great that Air Canada is on Vancouver, because it adds another point to the Dubai airport thing. We're going to Montreal. We have increased our production into Toronto with the 380s. This is just the beginning. If it works for both carriers, we're unlikely to leave it there. So there are other places, Calgary, for instance, which are all achievable, plus more production into the existing points.
And another partnership, Tim, which I believe is reaching its amazingly 10th anniversary, is Qantas. We've just heard today they've announced a successor to Alan Joyce later in the year, your good partner in crime, yeah, on that arrangement. And I saw the chairman of Qantas, as he announced Alan's successor, talked about the list of successes Alan had. He talked about the cornerstone partnership with Emirates. So that is still alive and kicking, notwithstanding Qantas doing non-stop Perth, London, and now Project Sunrise on the way. It's been beneficial to both of you.
Yeah. Oh, that I think caught the eye of Scott Kirby United,
right,
and probably Air Canada, because here was a One World Alliance anchor tenant, Qantas, doing a deal with a non-aligned carrier, which Emirates is, and really making a go of it. So the value to both carriers is very, very large and measurable. And I think that's what they looked at when they saw this. So I guess Alan and I put this deal together back in 2012. And it seemed to me that, Qantas needed something. We needed something. So together, we got something. And we built this great relationship, which I hope the new CEO will value and continue. I'm sure they will, because it underpins a lot of their fleet management, their network management, and their distribution and receipt of income in their corporation. So, shame he's going.
Yeah, no, he's a legend. Really, he's quite young, really, as well, isn't he?
Yeah,
56.
I don't suppose he'll retire.
No, he'll really disappear.
He'll appear somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Maybe become a non-exec on the Emirates board or something like that. Aircraft-wise, Tim, fleet-wise, you've talked a lot about the 380s coming back into service, but looking forward to the order book, tell us where things are now on that, because the 350, I think, is the next new type to come into the fleet with a more firm date. And then there are questions I'd like to ask you about with the status of the 787 order, the story of the 777X or the 777-9, which is still not even certified and has had a number of challenges. Yeah. Start with the A350, Tim.
Well, the A350s will be flying in August of next year. We take 50 of those in a 2.5-year compressed delivery schedule, because we need them as quickly as possible. The 777-9 program will probably providing it meets the certification timelines. And when the TIA is due in November, that's already a year later than they thought. The test program will start in earnest during the course of 24, and hopefully they'll have it into us by somewhere between July 25 and October 25.
Right.
But of course, we've been dealing with that by retaining the old 777s, refurbishing them. I kind of, it was one of the big shocks to us was that, the manufacturers couldn't deliver to the timelines that we had relied on. So we decided, along with a lot of other things, to refurbish, 140 aircraft, because we can never be held at the mercy of supply chain or manufacturers, both airframe and propulsion. We need the fleet flying, and whatever it takes, we'll keep the fleet flying. So we're now refurbishing all these aircraft, extending their lives. So if the 777 is late again, we've still got something in the armory to cover off that eventuality. But it's so far so good. It'll be 5.5 years late when it comes, but there we are.
It'll get here.
Yeah.
And also on the 350, I remember talking to you before, sometime in the last few years, as the dispute played out in public between Qatar and Airbus about the issue. I don't even know the precise way to describe it, lamination, paint-related issue. I remember you saying, we've been clear with Airbus that we will not take delivery of any aircraft until this is resolved. Now that dispute, that legal dispute between Qatar and Airbus is now solved amicably. Aircraft are returned to service, deliveries are back in train. I assume that Airbus has now got a handle on that, and newly delivered aircraft will not experience that problem.
Well, the statement we made to Airbus remains in place. I believe they've remediated the problem through a whole process of testing, the application of the paint to the composite and to the copper mesh or whatever it was. And I think they must have persuaded Qatar that was a perfectly workable solution. So I'm assuming that when they build our aircraft, which are just about to start if they haven't already, that we won't get the same kind of problems. But it wasn't just peculiar to the Airbus. Mm-hmm. The 787 had it as well, don't forget.
I've seen photos of 787s, I think, in the Gulf, very patchy looking upper surfaces of a wing as that kind of happened.
So it's a problem that is common to paint application on composite structures, right. Particularly if you've got a mesh that deals with the lightning conductivity. So they've got to find a way. I think it caught them short, quite honestly. I thought they had it sorted out, but what happened in this part of the world with high levels of sunlight, ultraviolet, and temperatures and everything else, it produced something different to what they thought. But, they'll solve it.
And the supply chain problems that we see with manufacturers and that you are making sure you can keep out of harm's way from, do you think the manufacturers are going to get a handle on that? Have they just done things in a too complicated way? Is it because of COVID and loss of skilled manpower?
I think they've, like everybody else, they realised fairly late in the day, by which time they had laid off, marginalised a lot of the resources that go into production of aircraft, that things were going to come back at them, the demand would return. But of course, we know the story of Boeing has got not necessarily much to do with COVID. It has all sorts of other reasons for the pickle that it's found itself in. Airbus have been a little bit more careful about what they've done, but they've nevertheless faced supply chain issues. These will come back. The supply chains will respond to demand. As long as demand is there, they'll sort themselves out, which is why probably in the middle of next year, you'll get to some degree of normality in production. But predating all of that was the pursuit of fuel economy, pursuit of lightening aircraft, of lightening weight, taking weight out of aircraft, and propulsion. And this is nothing to do with supply chain, etc. It was a belief that they could produce the technologies and the materials to drive those technologies that would give you the fuel reductions that we will aspire to, carbon footprint, whatever. The fact of the matter is they've caught themselves short. They over-promised, they couldn't deliver, their technology wasn't there for them, and now they're paying the price. And I was talking to the ex-head of civil Rolls-Royce yesterday about the criticality of airlines like Emirates having a 99.5% dispatch reliability with the best aeroplanes that work all the time. Don't worry so much about saving a bit of weight here and a bit of weight there, or your blades on the hot section in the HPT in the engines being a new kind of things which doesn't pass muster after 500 cycles, okay? Because you thought it would work hotter, burn less fuel, make the engine lighter, and therefore it transposed into that. What then happened is that the aircraft broke down. So instead of getting a 99.5% dispatch reliability, you get an 85%, which is hopeless. You can't run a business on that basis. So my message to them is don't overpromise on technology. In the pursuit of all these things, if you know it's going to compromise the serviceability of the aircraft. We work our aircraft 15, 16 hours a day, and their precision of timing with regard to their turns and the support that goes into it is done to the second. We can't afford to have things like this go wrong on us. So I think they're kind of learning on that, but now they've got sustainability pressures as well. So I'm trying to keep them focused on delivering reliable quality products. And if you do that, your fuel benefits will work through anyway, through better operations.
Tim, time is pushing against us, unfortunately. I've got to ask you one other big ticket item, product-wise. The premium economy, how is that bedding in and how is the rollout going? And more broadly, how do you see product going forward? Not just for Emirates, you've always had that product focus and you personally are intimately involved with that. But your competitors, is there a general focus on improvement, or is we have a bit of a mixed bag around the world?
Well, we weren't the first to have premium economy. It's been going, I think, Eva or Virgin started it years and years ago.
I think.
Yeah. We're fairly late in the day to come up with it.
Well, I remember you agonised for a long time about whether it was indeed a good thing.
Well,
it would be trade down or...
We did. And as commercial, all the planners knew we couldn't have a trade down, we had to have a trade up.
Absolutely.
But it was clear to us that as we got more and more intelligence on the reasons people travel, the amounts that they were prepared, what they were expecting, it was clear to us that about 5 to 10% of the high-end economy segments, buckets as we call them, were prepared to pay more, but not go the full Monty into business. And honestly, the planners were working to 4 decimal places to get this right. And when we started, okay, it was just at the back end of pandemic, but we exceeded our expectations and some. So the cabins were immediately full at prices that we never thought we'd get. So the yields were very strong, but we gilded the lily. I made sure that the wines were the best business class lines we could put on. We upgraded the food that we could have. We gave 3 cabin crew into the cabin. We provided the seats, and we really, really pushed the boat out to try and make this impactful. At the same time, we were upgrading business and first as well. So there's been a move post-pandemic to spend more money on product, not go the other way. A lot of carriers have done that. So premium economy became a kind of pivotal entity within our product spread, and it's proved very, very successful. So far, so good. What other carriers do? Well, it's up to them. The 380 lends itself to a good 50 seats of premium economy. And we were able to create that lovely cabin between the L1 and the L2 door with 3 washrooms just for them, 56. And every time I fly on it, the crew come up to me while I'm sitting on the upper deck, minding my own business as you do. And they say, Mr. Clark, there is a big party going on downstairs in premium economy, so you've got to come and look at it. They're all standing up. They're having a great time. I said, oh, that's good. That's good. That's what we like to hear. Tell them to sit down when we land, otherwise there'll be a problem.
And Tim, actually, I took a flight from Athens the other day, an economy flight with Emirates. And first of all, it was a great meal. I'm a bit of a foodie, and it was a substantial and a high-quality meal, even on a short flight. But the guy sitting next to me had a bit of a chat. And I think it was his first flight on Emirates, but he was in the travel industry. And he said, as we got off, it's so nice to travel on Emirates, an airline that isn't cutting back every aspect of customer service. I thought I must mention that to you. It was just a vox pop comment that I heard the other day.
Did you thank him for the money he gives us? I hope you did, John. We need it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Tim, we're almost out of time, and I debated whether to ask you the question you get asked more and more these days. But I think you announced you would be retiring. Was it 2019, thereabouts? And then COVID hit, and you stayed on to see the company through challenging times. And I think the last thing I recall you saying was you wanted to see the company back on a firm footing, moving in a healthy direction, which we've seen with the half-year results. You've alluded to the year-end results. Is that moment coming really, really close now, Tim? I mean, I wouldn't sense that it's something you would choose. I mean, you're firing on all cylinders, new ideas are coming out every day. Or is it, are you going to refuse to give me a direct answer? You're going to play the politician?
It's always a difficult one for me. I'm looking at the picture of me up there, which I think was taken about 10 years ago at least. I think I had more hair there. And every time I come on the stage, I get a younger picture of me rather than the picture of me as I am today. Okay. But you're right. There was no question about me leaving the business in the state that it was and everything else. And, you don't spend all that time with the team of guys that I work with seeing it collapse. So there was no way that I was going to leave that until we turned the business around, got it back onto a fighting footing. And what I'd like to see, and funnily enough, Alan Joyce and I had sort of quiet words about who was going to go first. So I sent him a message today, so you beat me to it again, But the idea was that we get the airline up and running, leaving it in good hands, great team of people who got working with me, and map the future so we know what we need to do, instill in the DNA of the company the need to deal with all the forces we talked about today, keep focused, and be part of this great thing that Dubai has become. I can't underestimate what Dubai has done for the carrier, and vice versa, of course. And if as long as things continue as the way they are, the team of people and the people below them should be able to keep it going. I might be around to make a nuisance of myself in a wheelchair.
Well, I mean, you have, I think, honorary Emirati citizenship, so you're not obliged to leave when you don't work here.
I do have that. Yes, yeah. I'm quite proud of that. But so that's basically where I go. But in the end, I will say to all you guys who ask me, it's not about me. It's not about what happens to me. It's what happens to the business and these guys who are running the business. I don't. We've got multiple players in this business: Adil Al-Reda, Adnan Kazim, plus all the other people who effectively run the business and keep it going. So I have every confidence that in their hands and what we've learned and instilled in the way we go about our business will continue.
Well, Tim, we are out of time, but I was just going to let you know, we were chatting before we started. I told you I have a small group of young mentees, the Gen Z, the mid-20s future leaders of aviation. One of them said to me, you were a role model. Another one said you were the Alex Ferguson of the airline industry.
Oh,
so on that,
thank you for that
positive note, Tim, thank you very much for the conversation today. I've enjoyed every moment of it. I hope the audience too has enjoyed what they've heard. Okay. And we look forward to the results next week. So Sir Tim Clark, President of Emirates, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Right.
I'd like to just hand over now, as we exit the stage, to my good friend and colleague, Shasham Nigam. He's going to chair the next session, looking at the very important issue we just touched on of sustainability. Shashank, the floor is yours. Thanks, Tim.